All right, today we're going to talk about experience of God as the transcendent, that which goes beyond. Main reading will be from Audible, pages 13 to 20. So in our last readings, we looked at how Ratzinger responded to the question of the existence of God. And in that, he talked about God as the foundation of the universe or everything. So this idea of God as that from which all things come, or the lasting reality, the realist of the real, is reflected in the philosophical term that's often used for God, the ultimate reality. Now, again, this isn't necessarily limited to the term God, because you have traditions and philosophies that will talk about the ultimate reality, not necessarily in a personal way. So it might not fit what we normally think here in our culture of God, which is a personal ultimate reality, a person who is the source of all being in the universe. But it's an important idea because Abel here is going to open up an experience of God to the transcendent. And again, it's not as specific as our typical Western concept of God. You know, the transcendent is not necessarily experienced in a personal way. But he's going to use it as a starting point to help people think, like, is there something that goes beyond what we see and what we experience typically in our average everyday lives, right? Is there an invisible reality? And we'll see lots of evidence for that. So we can see it is not it is quite a rational idea to believe in such a reality. Okay, we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves here. Let's start just with the word transcendent. What does it mean? Well, it basically means going beyond, right? It basically means not just what is here in an obvious way, but something more. It's beyond the range, that which is beyond our obvious, our typical, or use a technical term, gross experience. So that's the way Immanuel Kant used the term the transcendent. It's something that we don't perceive in our everyday experience. It's something we can't say, look, there it is. Does everybody see that? Right? The transcendent is the idea of something that is the source of, or perhaps the end of, or beyond our everyday experience in some other way. So if we look at the roots of the word, it means pretty much climbing over, right? So when I talk about transcendent, it involves the climbing over the limits of the everyday perceptible phenomenon, the things we see, and opening up the possibility that the perceptible phenomena are connected in and through some imperceptible ultimate reality, right? Something we don't see. So everything here that we perceive and everything here that we can know easily and demonstrate, everything that we might say is part of our everyday experience, these things are part of something greater. So one of the ways that we see this is the question of meaning. When we ask the meaning about things, we're asking, like, is there something more to this than its simple occurrence or appearance? Right? So when we ask questions, why did something happen? Is this the way it's supposed to be? Right? Is this who I was meant to be? Is this who I meant to be with? All these ideas of meaning. See what they assume there? They assume that there's something more to it than its own occurrence. Right? There's a reason for it. This seems to be, in many ways, a very basic human intuition. Right? Abel calls it an essential human characteristic, and it's essential functioning of any religious tradition to provide the believers with that meaning. It's a basic human inclination. something happens, especially something that affects us um, on a spiritual or emotional level. He said, what does it mean? Why is this happening? Right? So another way to talk about religion is systems in which people are given a way to understand the visible, a way to understand the things that are happening in their everyday life. And it's through the association of an invisible meaning, right, which ties those things together. Right? There's a point to it, there's a reason for it. It means something. So Abel brings up this question, why do people attribute meaning to at least the events in their life that they see significant, right? Why do people get the idea that there's something we can't see that is tying together and providing the reasons for the things that we can't see, right? Why is there some point behind this, you might say? Or why are these things meaningful, right? What's the reason for all this? Well, he gives three signs. He talks about three ways that people have found this experience of meaning and seen it as evidence for a transcendent reality, right? A reality that holds things together, a reality that gives life to things, the source of all things, and the end goal of all things. So the first he talks about is moral law, and C.S. Lewis in his book Mere Christianity laid out this theory quite clearly, right? He said all human cultures have the same basic sense of right or wrong, and this includes cultures that were existing in very different times and very different places and never had much interaction or any interaction between them. How did these cultures all end up with the same basic ideas about what was right and what was wrong? Well, this conclusion is that it must come from a common source of their being. And that common source is the transcendent, right? You can't point to it and says, hey, look, there's where all human cultures came from. Oh, look, there's what created the universe, right? But you see through its effects, right, in the fact that all human cultures, even ones that had no interaction with each other, have the same basic sense of right and wrong. You see, hey, well, they must have come from the same place, right? There's that invisible reality, that ultimate reality, that shared source that is what? The transcendent, that which is beyond our everyday perceptible abilities. Okay. Secondly, Abel points out my favorite sign of the transcendent, personal experience. And I'm just going to loosely label these positive and negative. It's not that one is good and one is bad. It's just that one is based on what one does experience and one is based on what one does not experience. Okay, so there's not a value judgment in the positive, negative connotations here. The positive and negative labels are simply a way to talk about um, the level experience of being or absence. Okay, so let's start with the first one, my favorite, the positive personal experience, the experience of a transcendent condition, love, right? When you love someone, you can't, turn to your neighbor and say, oh, look at this. Can you see the love that I have for this person? Can you see it just shining out of my heart, right? Right? Can you feel it radiating from my chest? Usually not. Maybe sometimes, but usually not, right? Peace, a beauty, the experience of the beauty of creation, the beauty of nature, right? Joy, contentment, all these things that people feel, but you can't point to it and show it to other people, right? It's not part of a obviously perceptible experience. again, this doesn't mean that people aren't perceiving them or having these experiences, just that when we talk about it's not perceptible with the five senses, so to speak. So, just think of a couple of examples that people have shared with me. And I think on some level, everyone has had an experience of something that points to transcendent. Right? I think everyone's had a moment, right? Magical moments, we might call them, when things just seemed perfect just the way they were, right? Or when they experienced love or peace on some level, right? So, I'll give you one example. When I first graduated from undergraduate school, I did a couple years in the AmeriCorps domestic service program. And I was working in Tucson with a group called the Youth Volunteer Corps, and another one of the volunteers who worked there was a good, ended up becoming a friend of mine. And she told me about how she had joined the Catholic Church because when she was in high school, she went to Mass with a friend of hers, and as everyone was going up for communion, she just had this experience that everything was okay. This is the way she described it to me. She said, all of a sudden I just felt that everything was okay, that everything was perfect just the way it was. She said she felt completely content, and she said, I never had that feeling before in my life. So this convinced her, right? This was evidence for her, right, of a transcendent reality. And she said, and that's why I joined the Catholic Church. Another example I can think of that this positive experience was when I was at a centering prayer retreat in upstate New York. And there was another retreatant there from Boston. And I can't quite remember the lady's name. It was something like Enid or something like that. It had some strong vowels in it. But anyways, she was explaining an experience that she had on another retreat, on a previous retreat. And she said she had this experience of love that was so strong that she had to go tell people. She was telling people. She says, no, listen, like, I know people talk about love and we think, like, we love things, but, like, love is just real. It's just its own thing. It's not, it's not something that people are creating that comes and goes. No, it's just its own reality, and it's real, right? So again, she had this experience of the transcendent. She couldn't point to it and say, does everyone see, the love radiating and filling the entire universe, right? But she had that experience of it herself, right? She experienced this unlimited, unconditional love that fills all things and brings all things into being, and experienced in such a way that she said this is the realest, right? It's not something in her imagination in the way she experienced. It's not something that comes and goes and is produced by your own efforts. She says, no, it's the realest thing there is. It's real in and of itself. So it was interesting, and it was really fun to hear her explain that. And some of these techniques, these contemplative or meditational techniques that we see in the traditional religions, like the meditations on the Brahma Viharas that we talked about in Buddhism, or a contemplative prayer in Christianity, they can really help open up people to these experiences of the transcendent. And that's why they've been a traditional part of the religious practices. Okay, so now for the negative. Again, this is not negative like, hey, this is bad. It's just negative, and that's an experience of the absence of something. And so in this argument, in this point, the people making it are going to say, listen, everybody is longing for something, right? this is like, in some ways, a corollary to the contentment, to the positive feeling of contentment. Right? Everyone is longing for something. Like, we go through life and we want something, but when you look at it philosophically, when you reflect on it, it doesn't seem like anything in life can actually satisfy that, right? Okay, so right now, maybe you're in college and maybe you think, hey, when I get out of college and I get into grad school and I become a doctor or um, um, a financial advisor or whatever whatever your dream job is, then that'll be it. I'll just be great. I'll be satisfied. Everything will be awesome. Now, okay, I'm not trying to burst your bubble, and I hope you do enjoy your career path. But I mean, look around, people, right? Like, it doesn't work. People who achieve their career goals, that's not it, right? They're not just living in a state of bliss. No, it doesn't satisfy. And even the positive experiences we might have of the transcendent, they're temporary. They come and go. This is a big part of the contemplative and meditative traditions, is the recognition of the temporal experience of these states and experiences that border on or open us up to the transcendent, right? So the argument with this kind of longing argument, or the negative side of personal experience, in the absence, that is, of the contentment that we seek in things, right, is that, if people had a longing for something from this world, people have a longing for something that this world can't provide, where did that longing come from? Right? And this is what St. Augustine of Hippo was hitting on when he said, "You have made us for yourself, God, and our hearts are restless until they find rest in you." So, in other words, everybody wants peace, contentment, joy, beauty, and although they may experience these things in moments in their life, they're not, things in life itself don't seem to provide the object of that desire, right? So the question is, so what's that about? Why do we have this desire if there's nothing here that can satisfy it? And the answer is, well, we have this desire because, right, it's a desire for the transcendent, right? It's not the things of this world that we are really going after in the desire for that contentment, peace, joy, that lasting experience of some kind of bliss. What it is that we are longing for the transcendent. We're longing for the source of all those things. The third side of the transcendent that Abel talks about is reason itself. Reason and the idea or intuition of truth. So he makes reference here to the theology of Karl Rahner, who's one of the great theologians of the 20th century. And he borrows this term transcendent horizon, right, which is a lot like Ratzinger's foundation of everything, right? But the transcendent horizon is the idea that when we experience anything limited here in this life, just the idea or the acknowledgement, the intuition that it's limited, then points towards something unlimited. Right? Does that make sense? Like we said, well, I know I don't know everything. We just said everything, right? So there isn't everything to be known then? Yeah, right? It might be unlimited, right? But there is that unlimited reality, right? That is the eternal, right? That we acknowledge when we talk about temporary, right? There is a permanent. If we say impermanent, we're saying, wow, there is some permanent. See how the words go together? Right? So the experience of not knowing everything about reality, if we can we recognize that and say, well, I don't know it all, well, then we're also saying that there's a possibility of this all, right? All is a real thing that we acknowledge in that very conception, right? So example, so by analogy, when we pick out one thing on horizon, we say, oh, in this picture we say, oh, look, there's a tree. We also acknowledging in some way that there's a space around the tree, right? And that there's a place for that tree to fit in. This is something that Heidegger, who was a philosopher that Karl Rahner used kind of as a metaphysical basis for his theology, talked a lot about, right? He talked about you see a thing, but around that thing is a space in which that thing can appear. So that's kind of the idea of horizon, right? We don't see isolated things. We see things on a horizon. We see them in a field of possible realities, right? So that's the idea of the transcendent horizon. When we have limited knowledge, we see that within the field of the possibility of an unlimited ultimate reality. Right? When we experience limited perspective on the truth, right? We experience we have a knowledge of part of reality. That opens us up to an ultimate truth or an ultimate